I was watching this one interview with Peter Spina. I think that's how you say his name. He's the CEO of goldseek.com. I sometimes read articles from that site. I actually do like that site. So, but the thing is, I saw this video and it was called "The Chinese Yuan Will Compete with the US Dollar Soon." And his definition of soon was most likely within the next few years based on what I was looking at or based on what I heard in that interview. And I do agree with the part of the thesis that the Chinese yuan will eventually compete with the dollar, but I don't think that's going to happen that soon. And I did used to think this a few years back. And even like 3, 4 months ago, I was doing videos saying that, hey, you know what? We're going to have a bond market collapse and we're going to see nasty inflation, so on, so on, like everyone else is talking about. And part of my thought process was that the Chinese would dump US treasuries, a significant amount of treasuries into the marketplace. But long story short, what when my mind started to change, it was because of what was going on in China, and specifically the repo rate was going on there, and I could show you why. Part of the reason why my mind has slightly changed since even 3, 4 months ago is I'm seeing all this negative news coming out of China when it comes to their short-term lending market rates or their interbanking lending rates. And let's just read this article for right now. And it's crisis gauge rises to record high as swaps avoided. China's credit market gauges are triggering alarm bells as banks grow cautious in lending to each other while government investors prefer the safest government bonds. So just read this carefully. As banks grow cautious in lending to each other while investors prefer the safest government bonds. So the big banks are cautious in lending to each other. Doesn't that sound like 2007, 2008 in America? Okay, now let's go on. The spread between 2-year sovereign yield and similar maturity interest rate swap, a gauge of financial stress, reached 121 basis points on February 19, 2014, the widest in Bloomberg data going back to 2007. 2 days later, the cost to lock in the 3-month Shanghai interbank offered rate for 1 year reached an 8-month high of 94 basis points over similar contracts based on repurchase agreements, which are considered safer because they involve government securities as collateral. And then this next paragraph talks about George Soros and Bill Gross talking that, hey, this is similar to 2008, but now it's in China. Okay, and I want to look at this very carefully, the next two paragraphs, short paragraphs. What I do see are increasing parallels between China and the US in the run-up to the global financial crisis, said Patrick Parrott-Green, a London-based strategist at Australia New Zealand Banking Group, Ltd. Shibor repo is similar to LIBOR OIS. Shadow banking is subprime. Credit spreads are widening as they did in 2007. Money growth is softening as tightening bites. In 2007, U.S. banks began to hoard cash when defaults on subprime mortgages led two Bear Stearns hedge funds to seek bankruptcy protection, pushing up borrowing costs. The gap between the 3-month LIBOR in dollars and the OIS spread soared to a record 364 basis points in October 2008. And I wanted to look at these two paragraphs closely. And this article, by the way, was written a few days ago, February 26, 2014, or like 4 days ago. And in the alternative media YouTube, right, I really don't know anybody talking about Shibor repo, or not even that, LIBOR OIS. I don't know if some of you who follow my videos closely, I have continuously talked about the 3-month LIBOR OIS spread. I referred to it as the LIBOR OIS spread, but technically it was the 3-month LIBOR OIS spread. Those rates shot up like crazy, and that showed stress in the credit market. So I want to revisit those graphs to illustrate to you what happened in 2007, 2008, if you did not see any of those videos I worked on. Alright, I'm going to show this graph once again. This is off of John Taylor's website. And this is the 3-month LIBOR OIS spread. And it basically shows the credit conditions when it comes to borrowing. Because remember, banks borrow short-term liquid securities, invest in long-term illiquid securities. And this Ponzi scheme of fractional reserve banking only works when these rates are low. And when banks don't lend to each other, these rates tend to spike up. Long story short. And if you look at what happened before July 2007, from January 1, 2001 to July 2007, the spread between LIBOR and OIS for 3 months, or the 3-month spread, was 10 basis points. See here? And this is only going from January to July 2007. And see what happened when subprime started to blow up in August/September of 2007. It went up close to 100 basis points. And then you saw intervention by the Fed and maybe some other entities as well to alleviate the credit spreads. But then, even though they had all these programs, these rates continue to go up. See here, in December, January, then they had the term auction facility program, January 2008, the rates started to go down in February. But then all of a sudden, they could not cure what was going on the interbanking lending market rate, right? They could not make those rates go down. And then all of a sudden, you started to see more problems happen in the banking system. And then when Lehman blew up right after, the spread came to 364 basis points, which I mentioned before. And this article is actually talking about that. And when the mainstream media starts to talk about it, even though I don't trust the mainstream media as much, but they are reporting that credit spreads are starting to blow up. And when I start to see that, that's a red flag. Does it mean that it's going to necessarily be like 2008? No. They've seen this before, so they may enact different steps, right? They may be capitalizing the banks in major, or I mean, they may be capitalizing the banks behind the scenes compared to 2007, 2008, where they weren't aggressively doing that. This is what Professor John Taylor was talking about in 2007, 2008. Whether you agree with him or not, he was saying the banks need to be recapitalized in order for the banking system to survive, right? And he was right. They didn't recapitalize the banks, and then until they had, excuse me, what was that program called? I forget what it was called in 2008. Regardless, they had that program by George Bush and TARP. Yes, that's what it's called, TARP. So they had TARP, and that's when the recapitalization of banks started to happen. But regardless, let's go back to the article now. So once again, they're saying that in China, going back to the article, the SHIBOR rates, like the 3-month SHIBOR or Shanghai interbanking offered rate, they're starting to spike up. Various yields. There's sometimes a 3-month that was spiking up. Before I showed you the 7-day SHIBOR rates a few months ago. So when you start to see credit stress going on, that in my opinion means that many more banks in China are going to file for bankruptcy. There's going to be a huge wave of defaults. And what we saw in 2007, 2008 is going to China. But they are going to react differently than the United States. But eventually, I don't think they could put Humpty Dumpty back together. And what does this mean going back to that one video I showed you before when I first started this? So going back to what Peter Spina was talking about, he's saying that Chinese Yuan will compete with the US dollar soon, and that basically we're going to go back on a gold standard and all that stuff. That was the implication that I got from it. And because of that, guess what? Gold prices are going to soar. But I'm thinking of this. Okay, if China is going to go through a process of deleveraging, that is going to kick the can down the road for China to compete with the US dollar, to be honest. This is just me reacting to the situation or what will potentially happen. So for those that are saying that a crack-up boom is going to occur within 2 years, well, I think that they're going to push the can down the road. And this is the deflationary head fake that I was talking about, right? A few months ago. And I did say in an interview last year that, hey, in 2015, 2016, we could potentially see a deflationary head fake. Or we would see it in the future. And then after that, these guys are going to create an insane amount of inflation. It may not happen right away, but what everybody's talking about, it may be kicked down the road. I think a lot of people right now are invested in the dollar collapse and hyperinflation, Chinese Yuan is going to take over, etc. But if I'm looking at the Chinese data right now, to be upfront and honest, and me reacting to the situation, what China's going to go through is significant amount of deleveraging. If they have deleveraging issues, or if they go through that process in 2 years, I just see a deflationary head fake. Prices coming down. You may see gold and silver go down, oil go down. But before we get to that, I do believe that in the next 1.5 years, we're going to see a rebound in commodities. Oil prices are going to go higher, and so on. And just as a disclosure, I am short oil for a trade right now. But I do believe within the next few years, we're going to see it go up, gold and silver go up, oil go up, other commodities go up. But then when China starts to unwind significantly, usually you start to see deleveraging going on every election period, 2000, 2008-ish, and then 2016. When that happens, I just see everything falling down. Like you saw oil go down in 2008. But I wanted you guys to comment on that. I wanted you to comment on what's going on in China and how will it affect the overall system when it comes to deflation versus inflation, gold and silver, etc. So I just wanted to do this video once again just to show that, hey, I do believe we're going to have a deflationary head fake, but I think it's going to happen within the next 2 years. Right now, we are going to probably see disinflation or a little more inflation than we saw the last few years from 2011 to 2013. Anyways, guys, thanks for listening. Comment below. I'll talk to you later. Bye.